I think you're going to be inspired and intrigued by the interns presentations, but we do ask you to hold your questions until the end so as to keep the flow going. Each intern has done incredible work in a variety of ways, and they could not possibly really go through their entire the entire scope of their work in just 5 minutes. But we asked them to prepare a sort of a 5-minute overview. So without further ado, so I'm going to stop sharing. And Adelaide, do you want to take it away?
My name is Adelaide. I am going into my junior year at Stanford University, and I'm studying English. And I was a communications intern this summer. And the project that I worked on was in a meet and greet for queer organizations in the Los Angeles area. And we called it Rainbow Connections, which was Jack's stroke of genius. So to start, I'll just talk a little bit about what our plan, our vision was. And to do that, I stole a line from Mason's email that he sent out, which says, "We are hoping to bring together a diverse community of LGBTQ+ organizations within the Los Angeles area to network, collaborate, and celebrate our shared goals and accomplishments." So that was the idea. And then some of the particulars of the event itself. This is our little setup at the entrance, having name tags and buttons for everybody. And then we had a little food spread. It was took place in the Santa Monica History Museum in the event space at the museum where we're currently partnering for the Coming Out West exhibition. And so it was a lunchtime gathering. And so we had a little like catered lunch of sandwiches. And the general idea was just sort of that it would be an informal gathering for people to connect and mingle and chat. And that is what it ended up being. And so here's some pictures of some people that were in attendance, just sort of talking at the beginning. We had about half an hour of time for people to just chat, and some names at the bottom of who was in attendance. And then Mason featured a couple of times, and then again, some others. And this is a list of some of the organizations that were able to make it to the event, which I can give you a second to read. And then some pictures of some Outwards people in action at the event. And then on the right, 2 of the staff members at the museum itself that spoke a little bit about the exhibit and about the museum. So the format of it was about half an hour of mingling, and then everybody gathered in this large circle, and Mason did an introduction where he spoke about about Outwards and Outwards mission and about the idea for the event. And then everybody went around and introduced themselves and the organization that they were there on behalf of. And quite a few people were not necessarily representing an organization, but were just there to learn and meet people in the area and find community. So that was cool. And some more pictures of the introduction. And then the way that Mason wrapped up the little circle moment was by asking everybody, giving everybody an index card and asking them to write on it their answer to the question, what is one thing that gives you hope? And then an activity to facilitate conversation. Everybody swapped their cards with somebody and introduced themselves and had a little conversation about their answer. And so this is just a little compilation of some of my favorite answers: nature, positivity, faith. And in my experience, because I was also mingling, it absolutely like created a conversation, and I had some really great chats about Los Angeles and about Outwards. And I got to share somebody asked me for a list of all of my favorite interviews that I've seen on the website, and I got to share that with somebody, which was really cool. And people gave me all kinds of life and career advice, and it was great.
1 minute.
Okay. Which is perfect. And then my reflections. This is also stolen from an email sent to Mason in response to the event. I heard positive things from people at the event. We heard things afterwards. Everybody was very like chatty, and there was like everyone mingled sort of in the exhibit and out in the larger gathering space. And it was like a very lively conversation. And then some notes on like looking to the future. we talked about in staff meetings, we talked about this event and the idea of it being for the community and created by the community and allowing people to create connections and share information and research, and how that might, in the future, if this sort of informal gathering event were to continue, how that might facilitate community in the Los Angeles area. And then really quickly, reflections for just myself. I learned so much in the process of putting this event on. I learned so much from Bliss and from Jack and from people at the event. Just in that hour and a half, I felt like I learned so much. And so it was a really good experience for me as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adelaide. That was wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Next up is going to be Aiden Cooper from Amherst College. And Aiden took on a really, really compelling topic, which is very much at the forefront of our work right now, which is the intersex community. And some of the challenges, some of the stories from that community, the history of intersex identification. And so without further ado, Aiden is going to give us a 5-minute overview of his work and his presentation. So welcome, Aiden, and please take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited to share what I've been up to. So when this idea of the project came up, I had a whole bunch of different ideas. And one that I was thinking about was the intersex identity, which I have seen been historically like underrepresented in queer spaces. And considering that Outwards is committed to focusing on trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex individuals for the next 3 years, half of their interviews are going to be with those communities. I thought it would be cool to do some research on the intersex identity and create some resources that Outwards can use moving forward. So by the end of my internship, I created 2 deliverables. I have a lesson plan that kind of goes into depth on the history of intersex activism, and specifically like the methods that activists have used to introduce like change for the intersex community. And then a sort of a visual document that I will be going through as well. So my lesson plan was kind of a very kind of scatterbrained look into the intersex identity. I talked a lot about the history of the term hermaphrodite and how that was the accepted term until around 1993, when Cheryl Chase created the Intersex Society of North America, which kind of kickstarted intersex activism. So the movement is incredibly recent. And that was something that was very apparent doing my research. And it was wonderful to be able to interact with a bunch of intersex interviewees that Outwards has. So David Straken, J. Kyle Peterson, Eden Atwood, I was in conversation with to build these resources so that people can teach each other and learn a little bit more about the community. So my learning objectives survey the history of medical terminology and treatments. That's a very large part of intersex activism, is intersex surgery, and we'll get more to that with my infographic. But intersex infants are often subjected to genital surgeries that are completely not okay. They kind of take whatever genitals that the intersex individual might have and sort of box them into one of these 2 binaries, which is not okay, because a lot of these intersex identities come from other places rather than just the outward appearance or aesthetic that they might have. So a lot of this work, I kind of start by talking about art, because I feel like art is a very interesting way to look at how individuals or things are looked at through time. So that is how I start and bring up the conversation. And we go into a lot of different writing, specifically from Hermaphrodites with Attitude, which is a subsection of the ISNA. And there's a whole bunch of articles that I found that students would go through and talk about and analyze how exactly the intersex community and these activists are pushing for change. Yeah, and then I think we can move over to my infographic. So this infographic is kind of a smorgasbord, your introduction to the intersex identity, specifically against infant surgery. So I talk about the first meetings of the Intersex Society of North America, again, 1993. The first large event demonstration for intersex rights was October 26, 1996, which is Intersex Awareness Day today. People don't realize how common the intersex identity actually is. It's about 2% of all people, which is about as many people are born with red hair. So that's an interesting factoid that a lot of people don't know.
1 minute.
Okay. And so I created this timeline that has all sorts of different progressions in medical terminology and different steps and steps back in terms of intersex activism. We are currently in a step back with all of the various transphobic legislation going on in our world today. California just recently, in 2022, barred a bill that would protect intersex people from surgeries. So there's still a lot of work to be done. But I also spotlight David Strachan, who is one of our interviewees, who's extremely important, who worked with the ISNA and helped create Interact, which is kind of the continuation of the ISNA. And I have some resources here that you guys and any students or anyone you're showing this infographic to can go to find more information. So this was a really wonderful project to work on. I learned a whole lot. I didn't know a lot about the identity before I came to Outwards, and really being able to interact with these interviewees on a very personal level was truly wonderful. So I had a great time this summer, and I'm really glad that this turned out the way it did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aiden. Really appreciate that. That was an incredible overview of an outstanding project. I want to share my screen again real quickly, just for the purpose of showing who is not able to be present today. You can see Sean Iftikhar featured at the top of the page there. Sean is a student at Bennington College and put together an absolutely beautiful presentation on kind of the history and vibrancy of lesbian bars and the role they played in helping to build our community. I'm very sorry to say that Sean isn't here with us today as they're not feeling well, but I wanted you at least to be able to see their face and to just let you know that Sean's presentation is really, truly wonderful. And I know you'll enjoy it. And again, that'll be going out to you all via email after the event. Without further ado, I'd like to move on to Johnny Zients, who also has done a really incredible presentation. And I'm going to let him introduce it. And so Johnny, take it away.
Thank you, Mason. Hi, everyone. My name is Johnny, and today I am going to be showing the infographic that I created. And the subject for the infographic is the LGBTQIA2S plus community in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I just want to start my presentation by briefly touching on the importance of the Bay Area, as I chose it as the subject of my infographic. So queer history in the Bay Area has had a far-reaching impact because it has been the place of so many firsts for the LGBTQ plus community in the United States. And beginning in the 1960s, San Francisco really became known on a national level as this queer capital. And this was really first coined in a 1964 Life magazine feature that touched on gay San Francisco. And San Francisco had this national reputation as being a safer place for LGBTQIA2S plus people. And this is brought to life by a lot of the personal accounts of Bay Area-based Outwards interviewees that I'll get into later. Before I do that, I just want to quickly mention that San Francisco's reputation as a queer capital has very deep roots. Queerness has been a fundamental aspect of the city's identity, even going back to the Gold Rush era. So historian Nan Elamilla Boyd actually refers to San Francisco during this area as a wide open town. It had very well-known vice district called the Barbary Coast, and nonconformity and sexual permissiveness was really baked into its early identity, which allowed the nightlife in the city to flourish, and it ultimately gave way to LGBTQIA2S plus communities that were very based in the city's queer bars and clubs. Okay, so the main spread of my infographic is this timeline that covers key moments in Bay Area LGBTQIA2S plus history from 1850 to 2000. And before I get into it and highlight some boxes, I just want to say that the pink that you're seeing is kind of a key that I use to point out LGBTQ plus events that were firsts on a national level that happened in San Francisco. So just highlighting a section here. These two boxes that are for 1961 and 1966 tell the story of a few key events. One is when Jose Sarria ran for political office in San Francisco as the first openly gay political candidate in US history. And then the other one is 1966, which is when a group of transgender women and drag queens demonstrated unprecedented resistance outside of, or in Compton Cafeteria, which was a space in the Tenderloin. And so these two events both happened before the 1969 riots in New York City at Stonewall Inn. And I was really surprised to see that a lot of the ideology of queer liberation was really, in the lexicon and was flourishing in a lot of ways in San Francisco before Stonewall, which is really seen as catalyzing the movement on a national level. And I also want to quickly just point out this box from 1983 that's kind of in the center of the screen. And that tells the story of Lani Ka'ahumanu, co-founding BIPOL, which is the first ever bisexual political organization, which she co-founded in San Francisco. And I'm showing this box just to show how a lot of outward stories are included in this timeline. And that's kind of one of the ways that I filtered and selected these like 15 to 20 events was through Outward's interviewee stories and a lot of the historical things that they did. So moving on to the last part of my infographic, I just want to recognize that my timeline ends in around 2000. And so, of course, a lot of time has passed since then, and a lot of things have continued to happen in the Bay Area that I wasn't able to include. But a lot of the people whose stories I've highlighted here in their interviews speak to the Bay Area and its continued importance since 2000. And so, so I was able to listen to around 30 interviewees from Outwards who had some connection to the Bay Area. And in this spread, I picked out 10 quotes that really speak to the symbolic importance of the Bay Area for these people and the impact that it had on their lives. And I just want to quickly read one of them. Oh, thank you, Liz. So Fenton Johnson says, the only city in the world that you could really have a professional career as an openly gay man was San Francisco. In that 1978 period, there was very much a sense that anything you did in San Francisco was in some ways likely end up to be seen by the farm kid in rural Kentucky or Kansas, or the kid in the Orthodox Jewish community of the Bronx, or whatever. There was a sense of being a beacon. So that's just one quote that I included, but all of these quotes really speak to the experience of moving to San Francisco and finding a relatively safer place with so much political and community activity. And just to finish up, reflecting on the experience, I really enjoyed listening to the Outwards interviews. That was my favorite part of the whole project. Overall, this was just a really great way to dive into history like I never have before. And it was really cool to kind of be introduced to it through oral history and then see a lot of these names and places and the Outwards interviewees themselves referenced in the historical narratives that I dived into. So I learned a lot. I really enjoyed it. And this project had a lot of personal value for me. I'm going to be returning to the Bay Area in a couple of weeks, and I'm really excited to see all these places in 3 dimensions and have this new lens to see them through and a newfound curiosity as well. Thank you so much for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Johnny. That was really, really fun. And if and when you all receive the presentation and you'll see those quotes on the final page, I just look at them and I think, what a great representation of the diversity that we seek out here at Outwards. You just have a lot of really amazing people bringing very different backgrounds and experiences to their experiences in San Francisco, and then being able to share those experiences with Outwards. So I feel like it's a great representation of the project as a whole. Without further ado, I want to move on to Nora McIntyre, who has put together an absolutely fascinating presentation which will highlight something that you might think you see it every day. You think, oh, I know what that means, but you don't know the history of that thing that Nora is going to tell us all about. So without further ado, let me pass it over to you, Nora.
I did my project researching the big flags of the queer community. I did a lot of stuff for this, so I'm going to try and speed through it really quickly. So the first pride flag was made in 1978 by Gilbert Baker. He has sadly passed away. It was in San Francisco, and originally it had 8 stripes. There was meaning assigned to all of them. There were some like very banal reasons that it got cut down to the 6. One of them, the pink dye, just wasn't available, and then they wanted to put one half on one side of a lamppost and the other half on the other side, so they needed an even number of stripes to do that, and that's how we ended up with the 6, which is kind of funny, I think. He says some things. I mean, I'm sure we would have loved to have him as an interviewee. If before it's very sad that he passed away. So there have been a few attempts in recent years to modify the flag. There was one in Philadelphia that added a black and a brown stripe to try and elevate the people of color in the city who were being discriminated against in gay bars. And then the next year, it was incorporated into this Progress Pride flag, which it's, as it says here, like the arrow, it partially incorporates like the black and pink triangle sort of motif, while also being like an arrow that elevates communities that need the recognition the most, while also showing progress. There's also an intersex flag variation. We'll sort of get to that. The bi flag is also like relatively old, 1998. The stripes are for same-sex attraction, opposite-sex attraction, and bisexuality, basically. It was also based on this, which was like a symbol that existed beforehand. I've seen photos from interviewees of this being on a t-shirt in like 1993, so it definitely predates the flag, which is also kind of the same idea, blue and the pink with the purple, also pink triangle, also purple, both motifs. The only flag creator that we have interviewed is Monica Helms. She created the trans flag in 1999, introduced it kind of to the world in 2000 at a parade, and it kind of just caught on from people seeing it and thinking it was cool. The blue and the pink are kind of like baby pink, or like for baby girls and boys, like that's the association. And then the white is for basically anyone outside of that binary for transitioning. And I think that this is really sweet, that the reason it's symmetrical is that if you have it horizontal, if you have it vertical, if you flip it around, no matter what, it'll be correct. And she has said like that's about being trans as being like, you get it, like, right? I tried to also, the flag was in the White House at one point, and it's owned by the Smithsonian now, which is like kind of fun and cool. There's a lot more flags that are more recent, that a lot of these are made in the early 2010s. They draw off of each other, and they draw off of the stripe design of the Gilbert Baker flag, and pretty much just like that flag was the start of it, and everyone since then has kind of done this. And there's a lot of kind of variation. The one big exception is
1 minute, yeah.
the intersex flag, which chose colors that do not have gendered associations the way that blue and pink do. And the circle is unbroken, and here's the quote: unbroken and unornamented, symbolizing wholeness and completeness and our potentialities. So it's kind of it's definitely different from a lot of the other flags, but I think it's really cool. It was kind of designed in a different way. The lesbian flag has a lot longer. There was this design, but then it got co-opted by TERFs, so it's it kind of sucks. And then someone made this, but the person who made it kind of sucks, and then other people made more flags, and then we ended up with this, and it's nice, and it's kind of just been decided that that's the one, which is really interesting with a lot of these, that it's pretty much just like people were like, yep, that looks good. And now we see them in real life at parades, and it's just like become a symbol for people. And I think it really means a lot to people to have like a flag that they can put an identity to, even if like it's not necessary. Also, I have like a million citations here. And yes, that is my presentation.
Thank you so much, Nora. That's wonderful. When Nora did her kind of practice run through with us internally, it was like 20 minutes long, and you did a fantastic job. You did a fantastic job shortening it up. Yeah. Thank you so much. You gave us a great overview and lots for our guests to go and explore on their own time. So thank you, Nora. For our final presentation is with Zoe, who has also tackled a really important and fascinating aspect of our community that has been very much in the news lately. And so without further ado, I'm thrilled to hand it over to you, Zoe.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe. I did a research project on histories of drag and cross-dressing, and I created an infographic, so I thought I would just take you through my infographic a little bit. On this first page, I have some definitional work. So drag is a type of performance and or appearance that involves a theatrical exaggeration of gender, and cross-dressing, which is a practice of dressing up in clothing typically associated with the opposite sex, which is a complicated phrase. And drag and cross-dressing overlap a lot. They both involve sort of a blurring of the lines of gender or an intentional playing with gender. But if you really want to differentiate them, drag is inherently made for theater, while cross-dressing is more often like a day-to-day form of gender expression. Moving on a bit, I have this box about how drag and cross-dressing relate to transgender experiences and how they can overlap. For example, in Monica Helms' interview, she talks about how she had considered herself a cross-dresser before she had settled into her identity as a trans woman. So my research, I took it in two directions, and I created two different timelines for those different directions. The first one is history of cross-dressing and drag in Western theater and culture. I'll take us through some highlights of the timeline. So it starts around 530 BCE. Some of the earliest plays were ancient Greek and Roman comedies and tragedies. And ancient Greece was a very patriarchal society, and they denied women lots of rights, including the right to act in plays. So whenever they had plays, they would have all the characters be played by male actors. So if you had a female character, it would be played by a male actor dressed like a woman. And then Rome followed suit. And that tradition of having male actors play all the characters continued through about the mid-1600s, when European countries finally allowed women to act. I'm going to skip around a little bit. So in the 1800s, we see the rise of variety-style entertainment, both in Europe and in the US. And female and male impersonation acts were popular both in in Europe and the US. I'm going to keep going a bit. So in the 1900s, that's when we see sort of, not necessarily a shift, but sort of the appearance of a new kind of drag artist or cross-dressing artist, or gender impersonation artist. There's sort of like a shift in attention from purely comedic drag queens towards a more glamorous sort of queen that is more focused on actually being perceived as a woman, versus before it was the focus on comedy and sort of a mismatch in, it's like, oh, that performer is obviously not a woman, and that's what's funny about it. And then we have also in the late 1900s, the rise of beauty pageants, or specifically drag beauty pageants. In the late 1900s, we have the rise of ballroom culture in Harlem and Washington Heights. And then in 2009, that's when RuPaul's Drag Race appears. And then I would say that's where we're at now, around like modern contemporary drag. And then I have this page with highlighting some interviewees, Outwards interviewees, and some quotations from their interviews about their experiences with drag. And then my second direction with my research was a history of anti-cross-dressing legislation in the US.
1 minute.
Thank you. And instead of going through some of these boxes, I thought I would just summarize some of the arguments that attorneys would use to defend cross-dressing defendants. Also, sorry, before I do that, a side note, this timeline very much aligns with the trans rights movement that was especially prevalent in the 60s and 70s, because cross-dressing and transness are very much overlap often. So the first argument is based in the First Amendment, which is freedom of expression. The second argument is from the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits the criminalization of involuntary statuses, and they would use that argument to say, well, transsexualism is a involuntary status, and cross-dressing is an inherent part of transsexualism, so you can't criminalize cross-dressing. And the last ones I'd like to talk about are the Fifth and 14th Amendments, which are the right to due process under the law. And the way that applies here is that they would say, well, you have to give people fair notice, explicit notice when their conduct is against the law. So if you have especially vagrancy ordinances, they would use vagrancy ordinances to justify the arrest of cross-dressers. But those vagrancy ordinances wouldn't say anything specific about cross-dressing, so attorneys would attack those ordinances for vagueness. And then I have another page with some more Outwards interviewees. These quotations are more specific to their experiences with anti-cross-dressing laws. And then my last page is more of a fun one. I have a drag culture glossary with some words and phrases that are important to drag culture, and then some drag media recommendations. Also, I have some linked, more detailed, extended versions of these timelines if anyone is interested in looking at those. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zoe. And really interesting, so timely, entertaining, current, all the things we love here at Outwards. And once again, thank you to the interns, first and foremost, who made this event possible today. We really appreciate you. We celebrate you. We love you. And as I said earlier today, you are permanently part of the Outwards community, and I hope you'll stay in touch.